What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and tonight we are going to be reviewing an interview between the Pints with Aquinas guy, I can't remember what his name is, and Dr. John Bergsma. And it's going to be a little bit of a disappointing interview here because we're covering chattel slavery in the Bible, and I have Dr. Joshua Bowen here with me to kind of go over this. Now, Dr. Josh, in case there's somebody that for whatever reason doesn't know who you are, do you want to kind of introduce yourself and explain, kind of shield yourself a little bit?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like if there's somebody that doesn't know me, let's let them live in peace. You know what I mean? Let's just. All right, fine. No, so I'm Dr. Joshua Bowen. I have a PhD from Johns Hopkins University in Ancient Near Eastern Studies with a minor in Hebrew Bible, and I got a master's of theology in Old Testament studies. So I do stuff in Ancient Near East, the Old Testament, and recently I published a second edition to my I don't know, book that I had to write much to my chagrin, maybe is the way to say it. Did the Old Testament endorse slavery? And so that's, yet again, more people, this time, people that we would expect to know better, saying dumbass things about this topic. So here we are.
Yeah. It's amazing to me the amount of hoops that I've seen, scholars and apologists sort of jump through for this particular topic. Now, I know you kind of wanted to discuss who Dr. Bergsma was, and I've heard Dr. Bergsma's name being, cited in various scholarly works that I've been reading. So this was a surprise to me, this particular video that he would take this stance on it. But I know that you kind of wanted to discuss his background a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when you see scholars come on and talk about topics, and you hear them just say things that are really wrong about things that you would expect them to not be wrong about. My gut reaction is always like, okay, well, so this guy is doctor, but is it a diploma mill? Is it? Oh, no, I mean, like Notre Dame, like he's got a PhD in I think Second Temple Judaism. Like he's the Dead Sea Scrolls guy, wrote his dissertation on Leviticus and the Jubilee. Like if I had just seen his credentials and what he'd written on, and then somebody said he's going to do a video on slavery, I'd have been like, oh, awesome. Finally, like another, voice, of reason on the webs. And lo and behold, that is not the case. So I actually messaged Kip Davis, because he's a Dead Sea Scrolls guy, and I said, hey, like I don't know the name John Bergsma, do you know it? And he said, yeah, I mean, like he studied with Vanderkam, like he's a legit scholar. Why? And I just went like, damn. All right. Well, to me, when I saw this video a week ago or whatever it was, I don't usually comment on videos, but I put one up on this one, and I just wrote something like, it's a shame that the guest apparently is unfamiliar with scholarly research on this topic from the last 70 years, because that's what came across to me. And it's just disappointing. It's disappointing. So anyway, sorry, I don't mean to poison the well. That's what I didn't mean to do that. That's what I'm doing. But we'll take an objective step back and try to deal with the data. Sorry, that was terrible. I should have done that at the end or something.
No, I mean, I don't know. I don't consider it too much poisoning the well, just because, like discussing that he's got a legitimate background. Like it's not like he's coming out of like AIG University or something like that. Dr. Bergsma has been cited in multiple papers that I've been reading here recently. So I mean, it's not like it's even for me, a layman and amateur in this particular area. It's quite surprising to see somebody of such a rich background take such a bad stance on this particular topic.
Yeah, it was surprising, but obviously, yeah, we'll present the data so that we're not just talking. I'll
Right.
try to
Yeah.
defend the position that I and all subject matter experts in the field will say about this. Yeah, I mean, you could just go pick up your commentaries off your shelf and read them one by one. They're all going to say basically the same thing. So, yeah.
All right. Well, here we've got it. There. All right. We just got a super chat in. We will be handling the super chats directly after we get done reviewing the video. I'll make sure to leave enough time there at the end to address any super chats that we may have. So if you have any questions for Dr. Josh, please feel free to send in a super chat tonight. I know Josh loves answering questions for everybody. As long as it's in his area of expertise,
Right.
he loves answering questions. All right. Well, let's get started with the video. So no real introduction here. Just Pints with Aquinas is sitting down with Dr. John Bergsma, and it comes upon this question about chattel slavery, and he goes down the rabbit hole pretty quick.
Kyle Whittington asks, does the Bible condone slavery?
Actually not. I wrote my dissertation on the Jubilee Laws, which are the laws of freedom. And so what you find out is that under Moses, true slavery is outlawed.
Let's pause it for just a second, just so that everybody kind of understands what he's talking about there. So his dissertation was, I can't remember the full title, but it's about the Jubilee. The Jubilee is something that gets really talked about a lot in Leviticus 25. And sort of the basic structure of it, just so everybody's on the same page here. Every seventh year, the Israelites were supposed to let the land lie fallow. Right? So they're supposed to work it for 6 years, do their crops, all that stuff. And then the seventh year, just let it lie fallow, give it a year of rest. And then 6 more years and let the seventh year lie fallow. They were supposed to do that for 7 full cycles. So 7 full cycles would be 49 years total. And then in the 50th year, they were supposed to declare what's called the year of Jubilee. And in the Jubilee, for Israelites, loans, debts, all these things were to be forgiven. It didn't matter if you took out that loan in the 48th year or in the first year. All debts were to be forgiven, loans to be forgiven. And anybody that had been taken into, of course, in this chapter, it wouldn't be slavery. It would be like being kept as a hired worker. But at any rate, everybody is supposed to have all their debts wiped clean. Any land that they've sold to somebody else, another Israelite, it's supposed to go back to them. Everybody goes back. It's a big reset button, right? And this is something that's typical in the ancient Near East. You see Andararu is the Akkadian term that's used to describe this type of freedom that's being declared. It wasn't cyclical, like as described in Leviticus 25, but it's something that usually when a king came to power or at a certain point in his reign, he would declare all debts for citizenry to be forgiven. But that's what the Jubilee is. And so he's talking about the Jubilee because the Jubilee is prominent in Leviticus 25, which is where we see this sort of notorious set of verses about slavery. But that's why he's mentioning the Jubilee here.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, from what I understand about the Jubilee, it's only about like the Israelite people. Like it's only about Israelite, like indentured servants. And so that's why it caught me off guard when Bergsma initially comes off with, well, is slavery condoned in the Bible? It's like, actually not. It's like, well, I don't know what Bible he's reading.
The Scholar Apologetics one.
Yeah. All right, let's see how he argues about this.
That's the point of Leviticus 25. You can indenture a fellow Israelite if he owes you money. That means you can make him work for you, okay? But you can't treat him like a slave. His civil rights are always intact. You know what that would look like. I don't know exactly in the ancient world, but he has civil rights as a free man. But yes, he can work for you to pay off his debt to a point.
Well, so I didn't notice this before when I've been reviewing this video, but like he says that he doesn't know what it would look like for like slaves to have civil rights in the ancient world, but I feel like the civil rights of slaves have been pretty well defined in other cultures, like in the Code of Hammurabi and other law codes in the ancient Near East. Am I incorrect about that?
No, I mean, like, I think, the idea of civil rights would probably be a little anachronistic. But I mean, I think as we understand it, there are certain things that citizens were entitled to, and the law would, again, sort of lay those things out. I think it's a complicated matter. That's probably what he's doing if we're being charitable here. I think he's probably saying, like, if I had to sit down and list what, things people had that we would consider to be civil rights, I don't know that off the top of my head I'd be able to list those out. I think if you were to say, hopefully, if you were to say to him, well, did they have this or did they have that, that he'd be able to answer like yes or no, or, something like that.
Yeah, I can see how the concept of civil rights, like as we understand them now, would be anachronistic. I guess in my brain, I was interpreting him talking about civil rights, which would be just like what kind of rights were afforded to slaves at this time. I guess that's how I interpret it, but I could obviously be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I guess it's tough to know. The thing that really, somebody said no audio. Sorry, I just noticed that in the side chat. But that's Facebook. Maybe that's.
Oh yeah,
sorry.
we've got. Sorry, we've got audio. I've double checked it, so I believe that it's. I believe that it's fine. I think it's on their end.
See, this is why I shouldn't look at the chat, John. This is why. Just like a squirrel, the thing that kind of I don't know, there's a little bit of we've got to be careful here, because one of the things that we need to make sure that we keep in mind here, and I kind of know this from what I remember the rest of the video, but I'm going to point this out here because it's incredibly important in this context. There is not homogeneity between the three law collections that describe laws about slavery, right? You have the Covenant Code in Exodus 21, you have the Deuteronomic Code in Deuteronomy 15, and then you have here the Holiness Code in Leviticus 25. These are not texts that are able to be harmonized with one another, right? They're very likely written at different times by different people with different ideas. And so the one thing that I want everybody listening to bear in mind is that Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15 both say that you can keep fellow Israelites as debt slaves, right? This is universally understood to be the case among subject matter experts writing in the secondary literature, outside of just looking at the text itself. In Leviticus 25, he's made mention that you can't enslave a fellow Israelite. That is novel in Leviticus 25. It is distinct from Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15. This is something that the writers of the Holiness Code are likely, reacting against, working with, and turning on its head earlier passages that describe the law. So we have to keep those things distinct. They're not just one set of consistent laws.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. And yeah, I didn't have any problem with what Bergsma said about indentured servitude. So, which I know who the fuck am I? I'm just an amateur. Let's continue to see what he has to say about the law code.
Only to the Jubilee year, and then every 50th year, all this is canceled and everybody's freed and goes home. So the worst thing that can happen to an Israelite is that you have to work for somebody to pay off your debt to them.
If I could just pause it,
kind of like indentured.
I'm sorry, I know I keep doing this. For those that are interested, Bruce Wells has an article out in, I can't remember the edited volume. I'm so sorry. It's 2011 book, I believe, if people are interested. It's about foreigners. The Foreigner and the Law, I think is what it's called. Achenbach, I think, is one of the editors or is the editor. Anyway, but he has an article called The Quasi-Alien in Leviticus 25. And essentially what Bruce Wells' argument is, and he's a legal expert from the ancient Near East down at the University of Texas, Austin, is that even though the text looks good, like what he's saying here, the worst that could happen to an Israelite, they have to work, that actually what the text is doing, what the law is doing in Leviticus 25 is arguably a sneaky way of making it worse for the Israelite. And it has to do with anticretic pledge or anticresis, but we don't have to get into that. But if people are interested in that, it's not even here so clear cut. But at best, I would say at best, the worst thing that can happen to an Israelite is that he has to work until the Jubilee.
Okay.
Servitude. Now, the other people surrounding the people of Israel could be enslaved, but only temporarily. And this is what you find, for example, in Deuteronomy 15, and there's a parallel passage earlier in Exodus 21. It talks about Hebrew slaves. Now, the thing that people mistake about that is they think that Hebrew is synonymous with Israelite. It's not. Abraham was a Hebrew, so all of Abraham's descendants are Hebrews as well. That includes the Ishmaelites, the Edomites, and a whole bunch of nations that we would regard as Semitic peoples, including most of the Arabs.
So I immediately, like, I was busy writing a response to this video when I contacted you about it, because this part right here just kind of seemed off to me. Like it seemed to me like he was setting up some kind of apologetic here for, including foreigners as Israelites, or at least including people in the Israelite code for, indentured servants, is kind of what it seems like he's setting up to me.
Yeah. So, okay, let me see if I can't sort of paint the background to the discussion. So in Exodus 21, starting in verse 2, you have a term that is introduced into the text. And it is an Eved Ivri. Eved means slave. Ivri is translated Hebrew, right? And the way that this word has been understood almost universally and continues to be understood in these contexts is what's called a gentilic. And what that means is that it's describing like a particular ethnic group, right? A classification of a group of people based on their ethnicity. So Hebrew would be like a group of people known as the Hebrews, as opposed to like a social class, right? These are people that it's like they're a type of poor or underprivileged or even enslaved group of people. They're more a social class under this understanding. Now, where did this debate come from? Good question. Thank you for asking, GE. No, I'm just kidding. So the word ivri is ayin beit resh in Hebrew, and it sounds an awful lot like this Akkadian word that we have that is apiru or habiru. And of course, Hebrew and Akkadian are both Semitic languages, and so very early on, after these Akkadian texts were discovered, particularly those from a place called Nuzi, this whole sort of firestorm went off about, oh well, gosh, these who are the Habiru? Well, they show up in a group of texts called the Amarna letters in the 14th century, and you have these Habiru that are like kind of brigands or like these sort of outlaws or sort of cast out of society, and they're off in the wilderness or off in the desert, sort of banding together, and but they're often like a poorer, landless group of people, sort of figuring out ways to make ends meet. And so they show up in texts as like outside forces that are causing problems for local kings, but they show up at the city of Nuzi in an interesting way in these documents that show that these Habiru or Apiru are coming in and as foreigners to Nuzi are coming into more wealthy landowners and saying, I will serve you as a slave until you die, the landowner. And then I will do your burial rites and all these other things. And then I will become adopted as your heir, and I will become heir to an agreed upon amount of your estate. And so Apiru, Ivri, there was this like etymological possibility of a connection. And they said, oh, well, gosh, well, maybe since the Habiru or the Apiru are foreigners very often, that maybe the Ivri or the Hebrews are also foreigners. And if that's the case, that the Hebrews are foreigners, well then, gosh, now Leviticus 25, 44 to 46, now it's got a big contender, because the Hebrews in Exodus 21 and in Deuteronomy 15 are only allowed to be kept for 6 years and released in the 7th. So this is why this was like an important thing for this discussion. So a guy named Meredith Kline wrote 3 articles in the 50s and sort of laid this to rest, in my opinion. Now, of course, scholars have written on it more recently. The big debate today is not what these words mean in their context, particularly in Deuteronomy 15, the passage that he's talking about, but the etymological derivation. Right, that's the thing that's sort of debated. So if you read Thomas Dozeman's commentary on Exodus, he'll be like, it's tantalizing to see a potential connection between the Habiru and the Ivri etymologically. Like, do these words actually relate to one another? Right, because not all words that sound the same are related, right? Obviously. But maybe there's a connection early on. This is where this word came from. But the question philologically, and this is what's so disappointing about this discussion, the question philologically about what a word means is not based on its etymology, right? And the easy example of that is the word gay, right? Gay doesn't mean happy anymore, even though it used to mean that, right? It now, it obviously means something very different. I think something much better. But the point is that you can't go, well, etymologically, right? Early on, this word had this meaning of this, therefore that's what it means. Instead, what we have to say is, how is it used in the sentence? How is it used in the paragraph? How is it used in the overall context, right? How are people using this term? So you don't go to, well, what did this word mean originally? if there even can, a connection be made there. I don't know if that was a real sentence there. Even if a connection could be made there. Instead, you have to say, what does it mean in this context? And so if I could just share my screen for a second, I wasn't going to do this, but share screen.
Let's see.
Where are we? Window. This one. Okay. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I can make it bigger. That's what she said. So I went through this morning and just listed out all of the uses of the term ivri in the Hebrew Bible. And don't worry, fellow viewer, dear viewer, I won't go through all of these. But like, I just, you can go to any like online Hebrew, Blue Letter Bible, whatever, and just search on this word ivri and just pull up these contexts. You can see it for yourself, right? They're used very consistently to talk about this people group that are the chosen people of God, and are often directly equated with Israelites or Jews. So, for example, throughout the Exodus narrative, notice when it talks about, the Pharaoh coming to the midwives and saying, "Drown the Hebrew boys," right? The boys. The Hebrew midwives say to the Pharaoh, "The Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women." Right? This is one of the Hebrew children. Miriam says, "Do you want me to go get one of the Hebrew mothers?" When Yahweh comes to Moses and Aaron and says, "Say to them, the God of the Hebrews." This isn't the God of all the foreigners, right? This is the God of this group of people that's enslaved in Egypt. But notice here in 1 Samuel, this is where they become very damning. You start to see in their interactions with the Philistines, 1 Samuel 14:11, "Behold, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves." So if you go back to 13:3 and 4, it talks about the Hebrews are the Israelites that under Saul had gone into hiding. And notice here also in 13:6, when the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were hard pressed, then the people hid themselves in caves and thickets and cliffs and cellars and pits. They're Israelites. And in 14:11, it says, "Behold," the Philistines say, "Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves." These are the Israelites, right? But I think the sort of the death knell here, and again, I won't go into all of this stuff here. I mean, you have a verse here where the Philistines say, or the text says, the narrator says, "No blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel." Why? For the Philistines had said, "Lest the Hebrews make swords and spears." Right? Why weren't there any swords and spears in Israel? No blacksmiths? Because they said, "Lest the Hebrews." That's who the people are that are living in Israel. But and then I'll shut up. But I want this point to be driven home. In Jeremiah 34:9, Jeremiah 34 is this passage that is pulling from the law in Deuteronomy 15. And it's talking about under Zedekiah how the people had not been during this famine or the siege, had not been releasing their slaves, their Israelite slaves. Notice what the text says in 34:9, that each man should set free his male slave or his male servant, and each man his female slave, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, so that no one should keep them, a Jew, his brother, in bondage. So it's not only now that they're being equated with their brother, which is a term that is used almost exclusively to talk about fellow Israelites, except in very rare cases. But it specifically then says a Jew, his brother, right? So anyway, this is why, and I'll stop. But this is why, you go pick up a commentary on the book of Deuteronomy, pick up 3 or 4, and just look at what they say about Deuteronomy. Now, there are other reasons that we can talk about here in a minute, why this is such a nonsensical argument in the context of Leviticus 25. But just to deal with this word Hebrew, ivri, the context tells you this is a term that is being used to describe the Israelites. And an example that I'll give, and then I'll be quiet, even though I keep saying that and I never do. John, tell me who an American is.
I would say that it's anybody that holds an American citizenship. Like,
What about somebody that lives in South America?
they could possibly be, I guess, an American if they are visiting. If they were born there, no, they're not American. They're South American.
But they're born in one of the Americas, John. And the word America applies to both South America and North America. So technically, right?
Actually,
notice how language no work that way, right?
Right.
And that's the thing that I think we need to make sure that we capture here. You don't go back to where does the word America come from, and could we no, it's what does the word mean in its context? How do people use it? And that is I think that's an example that sort of highlights how you do philology here, how you do lexicography on terms like this. Anyway, sorry, that was incredibly long-winded.
Yeah. So just to, I guess, make sure that I understand correctly, because this is one thing that I get a lot of shade for. It's in order to understand what an author means, like in this particular context, you have to understand how they're using the word, how this word is used in other portions, by the same author or by the same group and everything like that, in order to understand what is trying to be communicated by the passage. Would that be correct?
Bet. Right? I mean, there's an example. What is a bet? Well, a bet is when one places a wager. And so would we be able to go back to the use of the word bet and thinking about, 21 and doubling down in order to get at the meaning of that word? No, right? I actually don't know exactly what it means in the way that I used it, but I know that it doesn't mean placing chips down, trying to get close to 21, right? It's used differently. It's off the heezy, faux sheezy. All right, well, I've expended all of my cool capital. My coolness capital is gone.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone.
All your Gen Z language has been used. Well, I think the current usage of bet in that particular respect does go back to betting. I mean, people don't associate it with that now, but it's kind of like, somebody makes a claim like, oh, you can't jump that. And it's like, oh, do you want to bet? Like, do you want to put money on whether or not I can make that jump? And I think that it kind of got assimilated into common language, just bet, as if to say, definitely, or, I believe in this so much that I would put money on it.
See, but the thing is, I didn't you could not assign any of that betting language to the way that I just used it, even though that might be the case, even though it might be derived from that. This is an example of, even if that's the case, you cannot assign any of that intent to me at all. I'm using this in a way that's just yep, that is correct.
Casey said stupid. Not that you're stupid, Josh, but that the use of Gen Z language is stupid.
Tell Casey IDGAF.
she just shot a side eye over here. All right. I think we could get through a
Yeah.
little bit more of Bergsma's argument here, but I'm glad that we were able to lay that down before, because that's one thing that I kind of came across and I was just like, that just does not
Yeah.
sound right. Like, this seems like a dubious argument here. So I'm glad you were able to clear that up for me.
Peoples that later settled in a ring around the nation of Israel, which is the logical place where they might get, what might purchase slaves. So in Deuteronomy 15, it allows the Israelites to buy slaves from the Hebrews, which would be the people surrounding them. But even there, it limits the term of slavery only for 6 years. And in the 7th year, you have to release, even your foreigner has to be released. So it cannot be permanent.
I mean, he says unless. I think that he's got a caveat here, but like reading Leviticus 25, 44 through 46, where it says that this, you may buy slaves and you may pass them down to your children and everything like that. Like, they are your property. Like, I don't understand how he can say this and portray the nations from around them as being like when you buy slaves from them, you have to adhere to the Israelite law as far as like treating them as Israelites. I just don't understand that.
Yeah, and I think I know this is not what I intended to do, but you know what? Here we are, and it is all a journey. Let me just share my screen one last time. Can everybody see this? Let's just,
Yep.
Is that all right? Here it is, Leviticus 25, 44 to 46. Notice what he just argued. And I apologize, I just pulled up some Hebrew that I could enlarge. You get foreigners, you set it free for 7 years. It's based on this term Hebrew. And if Hebrew, foreigner, square that. Let's assume it's not, but let's assume for the sake of argument that he's right there, that Hebrew means foreigner. Go ahead and square that with this. And this is exactly what you were saying. And as for your male slave and your female slave, whom literally they will be to you, whom you will have, from the nations who are around you, from them you may purchase a male slave and a female slave, or male and female slaves. And even from the children, the sons of the tenant farmers who are living with you, from them you may purchase, and from their families who are with you, whom they have borne in your land, and they will be to you as achuzah, property, right? This is the same word that's used to talk about the land that gets passed on as an inheritance. And you will make them an inheritance, or give them as you probably may give them as an inheritance to your sons after you, to possess or to inherit as achuzah again, la'olam bahem ta'avodu, forever. You can make them serve, right? So this doesn't say, and for 7 years, right? Or in the 7th year. This is forever, pass on as inheritance to your children after you die. But your brethren, the children of Israel, each man his brother, you must not rule over him with violence. I'm sorry. And by the way, if people are interested in this, and I'm done, you can take it away. But if people are interested in watching me and Dr. Kip Davis translate Hebrew every other Thursday, we do this over on his channel, just like I was doing there, and I explain the grammar and the syntax, so does he. But if you're interested in Hebrew, come on out and join us. But how in the world you're going to go to Deuteronomy 15 and try to reread the word Ivri, which is juxtaposed specifically with your brother, which in the chapter itself is talking specifically about Israelites. There's an appearance in chapter 23 that talks about the Edomites, right? But it's in a very restricted context, that it's sort of a special thing. But the point is that Jeremiah 34 pulls up on this and says, it's not just your brother, it's Jews, right? So how you're going to go there, try to make an argument when the chapter itself, Leviticus 25, tells you foreigners kept for life, made property, passed on as inheritance, served forever. Hello? Like, this was disappointing to me.
Yeah, I mean it's I really don't understand how he can make the argument like this without knowing. Like, I guess it's a little hard for me to square it with somebody that legitimately like believes that the passage says this. I feel like I mean, I don't mean to impart any kind of intent on Dr. Bergsma here, but I kind of feel like it's really hard to actually make this argument, like, and think that you're making a coherent argument, I guess.
And John, what's so bad about this, and I'm sorry, but what's so bad about this is if he wrote his dissertation on the Jubilee in Leviticus 25, guess where this passage is? Leviticus 25.
Yeah.
Yikes. Come on,
Yeah, I know.
man. Like, he's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, because I mean, I totally expect it to say right there that, oh, and these people will be released in the Jubilee year, but instead it's like, nope, you own them forever as well as their children. Like, and you can bequeath them to your children, so they're fucked.
Yeah.
Unless they want it, unless they feel like their position in your household is better than what they're liable to get anywhere else. And then if they submit to it, then
can we pause it for just a second? I know I keep doing this. So sorry, but I want just 2 seconds. Everybody listen to what he's getting ready to say and keep this in mind. What does duress mean to you?
That's good. Everybody get out your Google dictionaries. Look up duress.
Can be pierced, and then they could become a permanent member of the household. And people say, like, why would you ever want to be a slave for your whole life? Well, I'll tell you why. Employment security and benefits, like the ancient world, was brutal.
Can't see.
Employment security. It's like working for the United States government. You can't get fucking fired for nothing. So he's claiming that a Jew who's an indentured servant could choose to become part of the household for employment security and benefits. I don't understand that part of it. Like, it is that really how it is, Josh? Like, I know that you've talked about this before and how this is one potential loophole for an Israelite becoming a full chattel slave, but I guess I'm just kind of curious about, like, is that like an outlier situation, or is in the real situation is like, oh, they were happy-go-lucky with their master, and it's like, well, fuck, I ain't got anything else to do. Why don't I just get a new job or retain the same job here and get some benefits?
I mean, I think the answer to the question would just be to look at any of the ancient literature that talks about the life of a slave, right? And find out how many places say, isn't it great to be a slave? Don't you want to be a slave? Ain't it awesome? Right? Even the people that go and say, I will serve you for X number of years or until you die or whatever in order to gain an inheritance, there are huge penalty clauses if you back out of those contracts. Well, I mean, why would you have to have huge penalty clauses to back out of the contracts? I mean, isn't it awesome to be a slave? Isn't that what everybody wants? I mean, if it were the case, as Dr. Bergsma points out, that everybody just like, it was such a great thing. Why weren't you allowed to treat fellow Israelites as slaves by the time you get to Leviticus 25? Thought it was a great thing. Thought it was awesome. Like, of course you'd want job security. Like, what? Do people do it because they can't do other shit? Is it because they have duress? Right? Like, yes, they do it then. Right? And could there be examples where it's like not as bad as other, examples? Or might it be better than diet? It's like, sorry. This is like saying, oh, the woman in Deuteronomy 21, that captive bride? I mean, my God, why would anybody want to be a captive bride?
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Or
that's a good question. Well,
yeah.
They might have to be, right? Because consent isn't a thing. They're under duress, right? It's that or die, right? Like, or that or be a regular slave. It's just such a apologetics. I should stop. I was going to say I should stop before I go off, but I think it's too late.
I love Dr. Josh going off.
Gosh.
Well, so this also reminds me, and maybe this, tell me if this is a similar situation, but it's like, Numbers 31, where they forcibly take the young virgin girls after killing their entire people group. And, I've heard a lot of apologists say, oh, well, what are they supposed to do then? Are they supposed to just leave them out there to die or force them to integrate into the Israelite society? And it's like, the key word there is force. Like, you're forcing them into this, like it's under duress. Like, you can't, it's like, why would anybody want to be like forced to marry somebody they don't like? I wonder why.
And John, we would call that genocide today. Even the forcing them to marry and to convert, that's called genocide. It's getting rid of their culture through conversion. It's not so bad. Yeah, I mean, it could be worse, right? It's all a journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, but I at this point in this interview, like, I don't have a very high opinion of Dr. Bergsma as far as this particular context goes, because he's coming off to me, and I could be wrong about this, but he's coming off to me as one of those apologists that get on YouTube or wherever, and they try to make arguments to make it seem like the horrible passages in the Bible aren't really all that bad. Like, I feel like they have to twist the definitions. They got to twist like what the Bible actually says, the Old Testament specifically, in order to be like, it wasn't all that bad. I mean, come on.
I just, like, to me, and then I'll stop talking. We keep watching, but like, this is a case in point of why I'm very careful about making comments on topics that I haven't thoroughly read up on. Right? So he doesn't say like, hey, you know what? I haven't looked in depth at Deuteronomy 15. I haven't read through all the secondary literature. Like that. So these are my thoughts off the top of my head. Could be wrong about it. Please go look. He doesn't say any of that. Right? He's just coming out as a matter of fact. This is what this means. And that sort of stuff bothers me because it makes my job harder. I mean, I guess it gives us these videos to make, but I wish people would be a little more careful with their presentation of the data.
Yeah. I mean, I would totally agree with being a lot more careful if you haven't read up on a specific topic, and for sure.
Brutal. Working for yourself was no fun. It was a good way to die. It was, as Jordan Peterson said, not good.
Well, it's not good.
It's not good.
So, sorry. I mean, like, you start quoting Jordan Peterson and just everything's in the crapper for me. But like this whole idea that's, working for yourself, like nobody would want to do that. Like, what are you talking about? I mean, this sort of thing, um, how did urban centers work? Like, I'm sorry, we don't have to go into all of this, but I mean, this is just, to me, this just screams somebody that hasn't actually gone through and seriously engaged with the literature on these topics, right? Like, certainly, you have things like the old Assyrian trading colonies, right? Now, obviously, these are people that were able to buy in, so not everybody's going to be able to do that. But I mean, some of these families are very poor, or at least to a certain degree had to extend themselves quite a bit. They were able to get credit, and so I mean, but the point is that, like, there's a reason why slavery is seen as a bad thing. Yeah, like, listen to the poor widow woman in 2 Kings 4. She doesn't say, "Thank God, the creditor is coming to take my 2 sons away. We don't have enough we don't even have a jar of oil in the house. Oh my God, what a thank you, Yahweh, for sending the creditor and come and take my sons as slaves." What? I mean, but you would think that that's what she'd be saying. Like, whoo, whoo. I mean, yeah, close one there. Yeah, we're about to run out of money, but now the creditor's coming to really help us out, right? I mean, give me a break. Just give me a break.
Well, another thing that I'm recalling just now, that we had like a whole stream over when we were reviewing Paul Copan on this topic, the Leviticus 25:47, directly after the slave passage, talks about the specific instance of a foreigner, being able to amass amount of wealth and being able to, have indentured servant like Israelites there too. Is that correct?
He's talking about in sorry, I think I looked at the side chat again, John. I'm so sorry. You're talking about in 25:47 to 55.
Yes, that one.
Yeah, and just so people are aware, I just sorry, this is going to be shameless. I think I showed you this. I published a chapter in this book,
Mm-hmm.
and it's on violence and genocide in the Hebrew Bible. And one Paul Copan responded to my article.
Oh, really?
In a blog. I can't remember what website. I've got it. I
Oh,
posted it.
so not like a journal or anything like that. Or
No, I mean,
kinda,
it's
okay.
and it's. I mean, you don't. I guess you wouldn't really write it. Like, I don't think you'd really write an article, like a peer reviewed article, to address a chapter or something. But he did, publish this critique. So I published a rejoinder that went up today on a website, or it's like I don't know what you'd call it. It's a place where articles, like popular scholarly articles, are written, called The Bible and Interpretation. I put it up on our YouTube community tab so people can go find it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a rejoinder to Paul Copan, and yeah, I encourage people to go read it, because I had to tone it down. Megan said I was kind of cheeky on the first draft. I actually wrote "Oops, Paul" at one point, so she said, "You probably should take that out." But
Oops, Paul.
but
You fucked up, Paul.
but yeah, so this idea that yeah, I mean, they want to have their cake and eat it too, right? Because you've got Toshavim in 47 to 55, who are foreigners. They're living in Israel. They're using rented land, right? And they're becoming so wealthy on their own that they can purchase their own Hebrew slaves or Israelite slaves. Like, you can't have it both ways. You're exactly right. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah. And just for those that are watching on YouTube, I've updated the description. So I don't know if you want to refresh or whatnot, but I put Josh's article responding to Dr. Copan there.
Thank you.
But in light of what Bergsma just said here, I feel like it's totally contradictory for him to say, oh, working for yourself is like a death sentence. But then like apparently whoever wrote Leviticus 25 felt it necessary to specify very specific instances where people were working for themselves but being so profitable and all this other stuff. Like it just seems like, I'm not saying that, like, everybody was successful as a small business owner in Israel, but it just kind of seems like the way he put it was like, oh, it's a death sentence to want to work for yourself. Like who was running businesses at that time? Like, was the government just running all of the businesses? It was just
Hey, but Jordan
unfettered
Peterson
socialism.
said it was bad, John. So
Oh fuck, we're dead.
yeah, just
Dead
hit
in
that,
the water.
hit that end show button. We're done.
I'm fucking foiled by Jordan Peterson once again. All right, let's see where he goes with this.
A lot, day laboring was not a very fun thing in the ancient world. If a day laborer was sick, he didn't eat that day because he didn't earn any money that day. Oftentimes it was hand to mouth. And but a slave was a member of the household. If he got sick, he was cared for. The master, if for no other reason than the fact that he had a huge investment in this worker, would care for you and nurse you back to health and so on, because he had invested a lot of money in you and needed your labor and so on. So slavery typically had benefits to it, and you frequently find in the ancient world that bonds of affection arose between masters and their servants.
Yeah, I mean, it was so common that Job in Job 31 called attention to it. Hey, I've never wronged my slave. Well, I mean, it's just so common that that these bonds of affection build up, and that's what they're so known for. That people would just look at Job and say, "Yes, so what? We all did that, right? Right? Isn't that how that works? I mean, that's why in Jeremiah 34, none of the people are freeing their slaves, right? Because those bonds of affection. And then when they do free them, they went and steal them back, right? It says bonds of affection. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, why would they have specific laws and everything in this portion of the Old Testament about runaway slaves and how to handle those situations? Like, why would they want to run away from a good thing?
And
right?
GE, listen. See, you're just an atheist that's suppressing that truth and unrighteousness. Very well that slavery in the antebellum South, there were slave families that really loved their slaves. And so it must have been okay, right? Because there were bonds probably that built up between some of those slaves, right? Miss me with that shit.
Yeah. Casey said, just ask Thomas Jefferson.
God.
Another thing that kind of came to my mind as I'm watching this with you right now, I remember you telling me one time that the whole spoil the rod or spare the rod, spoil the child was, a parenting advice in the Bible, which is great, right? But also that was kind of the tactic that was used for slaves. Like, that was the general idea of these slave masters, was in order to instruct your slaves, you can't spare the rod. So I mean, it was not necessarily saying that it was mandated beating, but it kind of seems like that was how the Israelites thought about disciplining slaves, or at least teaching their slaves not to fuck around and find out.
Proverbs 29, 19 to 21, right? It's in the Proverbs. So, I mean, it's common enough that it's fucking in the Proverbs, right? Slaves are not like motivated by words alone, right? For he will hear but not understand. A
So you gotta beat
slave
a
pampered,
motherfucker.
yeah, a slave pampered from youth will become either insolent or become like a son. But that like the point is like, why is it? Let me ask this. Let's make it easier. Do you think that there were loving relationships between fathers and sons? Sure.
Probably, yeah.
What do the Proverbs say about beating children, right? If you love your child, you will beat him, right? Like there's a reason where wickedness is bound up in the heart of a child, right? But the rod will drive it far from him. Like there's a reason these proverbs are in there because this is the way they thought about motivating people. Like I just sorry, were there cases where slaves and masters like really got along? Probably. And I mean, look, let's say he's 100% right here, and every slave was like, whew, got me some health care, right? Oh, snap. So is that what we're saying now, Dr. Bergsma, that health care is worth giving up one's freedom? Is that what we're saying? Like, I don't think that's what he's saying, but anything to make slavery not so bad in the Bible, right? Anything to make it not so bad. Come on, son. I'm in a mood tonight.
Gotta spread some sprinkles on that shit ice cream you got, huh?
God. Ugh. Sorry, I am. Something's happened to me where I am just more cheeky now. I'm just getting old. Yeah, that's all it is. I'm just getting old.
I mean, honestly, yeah, I could totally see you just getting tired of the bullshit that gets repeated over and over and over, and then having people that are not experts in the field be like, "Hey, but it says this," and then come up with weird things. I could see getting tired of that, and just at some point being like, "Fuck it, that's dumb as shit."
Sorry.
No, it's okay. We got a little bit of time to listen to a little bit more of what he says because this entire interview is bad.
Yeah.
In these situations, and people would sell themselves into slavery in order to gain the security that it offered over being a day laborer. That's hard for us to get our minds around, in the modern age.
Was it chattel slavery like is practiced in the New World? But
no, I mean,
I think people get that confused.
Well, so I hate how this is framed from the Pints with Aquinas guy, because it's like, is it chattel slavery? Yes, it was very obviously in Leviticus 25:44-46. I mean, that's a clear-cut answer. But then he goes further to compare it to antebellum slavery, which brings on, I feel like, a whole lot more connotations to like slavery in that aspect, because there were different circumstances for antebellum slavery versus the chattel slavery that was practiced in the ancient Near East. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I think his answer is like, if I'm remembering it correctly, is sort of the stereotypical apologist answer, and it makes me want to weep and then die. So I guess we should listen to it so that I can feel like I need to weep and then die.
All right. Well, I hate to make you feel that way, Josh.
What's so perverse about slavery in the New World was it ended up as a race-based thing, and people have a hard time wrapping their mind around the fact that in the ancient world is like anybody could become a slave.
That makes it so much better.
Everybody say it with me. Therefore, what?
What?
Right? Like, therefore, what, Dr. Bergsma? Oh, it wasn't based on race. Okay. Then it's fine. Yeah, I get tired of this one. It's not based on race. Now, like to be 100% clear, that is horrific that slavery became based on race, right? For a whole set of reasons, right? A whole, the aftermath of that continues to have detrimental effects on the world around us, right? But it doesn't, it's like, let's say best case scenario for his analogy. Well, he wasn't a serial killer that killed scores of people. He was only a serial killer that killed like 5 people. Oh,
That's so much better.
okay. He closed the case, right? This one's all right. We got better things to do. Like, give me a break. Give me a break. It's just this sort of thing that it's like, let's bring up something that's worse and say, well, it's not that.
Mm-hmm.
But then not actually deal with what it was, right? Because it's, even though it's not based on a particular race, it's, are you a foreigner? Yep. You're the ones that can be enslaved now as chattel slaves. Israelites can't. My people can't. Chosen people can't be, right? Can't even keep them as indentured servants anymore by the time you get to Leviticus 25. But foreigners, chattel slaves, no problem, right? It's just, yeah, therefore what? That's what we should all be asking. Therefore what?
Yeah. And I don't know. I could be wrong about this, but just thinking about this a little bit more, because this is a common argument that they use. But for anybody that doesn't know, like the topic of race and like what race is, it has a complex history. And from what I understand about race is that, going back to ancient history, race was more akin to people groups. And so like that's why Jew or Jewish is both a religion and a race of people, because the Jewish, there's the Jewish religion, but then also there's a group of people who were all Jews but are also Jewish because they share a bunch of characteristics with one another. They're a whole people group. And so like I kind of feel like, and maybe I need to think more on this and you might disagree, Josh, but I feel like the kind of slavery that was practiced, the chattel slavery, at least, that was practiced in Israel, being that they had laws specifically about how you can't enslave your fellow Israelite, and you could only enslave people outside of Israel, like foreigners. In the context that are listed in the Bible, I kind of feel like in a non-anachronistic sense of race, it was kind of race-based because you weren't enslaving Israelites. Now, that doesn't mean that, obviously Israelites couldn't be enslaved. I'm just saying that, like, I feel like the conversation that they're having right here is a lot more complicated than they're letting on. And mentioning of race adds a layer of complexity onto the conversation. I feel like you got to be way more nuanced to the discussion than they are letting on.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think in best case scenario for the analogy, it's like, well, Your Honor, the defendant killed these, murdered these 6 people and tortured them in these vile ways. But before he did so, well, Your Honor, my client did not create lampshades out of, I mean, let's just get that right off the table right away, right? Hey, think about this other Sid he created lampshades with his, but he didn't do anything like that, right? So let's just start off with that. Like, oh, okay. I mean, yeah, yeah, that's sort of what comes to mind for me.
Yeah. All right, let's listen to just a little bit more of the interview, and then we've got a few super chats to.
I think he goes into like the New Testament after another minute or so, and that's probably outside of my wheelhouse. So I think if I remember what he says, it's sort of like probably ought to have somebody else rag on him about it.
Whether you're Caucasian or African or Semitic or whatever, that was like equal opportunity employer, so anybody. and within Egypt, Egyptians themselves could be reduced to slavery if they committed a crime or something like that. And so it was not racial at all in the ancient world. So that's one thing you have to wrap your mind. And the other thing you got to wrap your mind around is that typically there were expectations. There were cultural expectations, and legally, an owner might be able to be a real jerk, but there were social norms that were typically upheld, and most people did not want to be perceived as an evil person in the eyes of the rest of society. And so usually there was this effort to be humanitarian towards the people that worked for you.
I mean, that's just a bullshit statement. I'm sorry. It's just a bullshit statement. Like, evidence, please, of these social norms. First of all, it's completely nebulous. People didn't want to be seen as evil. Sure, right? What are you defining as evil? Okay, I mean, sorry, that makes me very upset because like when you use this sort of ambiguity, it's like saying, well, you have to love your neighbor, right? Or you love the foreigner. You don't want to be seen as evil. Well, of course, but see, if you're equivocating on the use of the term evil, right? We would say, and hopefully even more so as time goes forward, that it's evil to like beat our children, right, with wooden rods or with switches or stuff. Like, hopefully 50 years from now, they'll say, well, it's evil. You wouldn't want to be evil. So back in the 1950s, they wouldn't have wanted to be evil. So certainly they wouldn't beat their kids with switches. Well, right. But they didn't think it was evil. Right. So it doesn't work that way. That's an equivocation. You can't, you have to be a lot more specific about what you're saying. And what are these social norms that he's talking about? What are these laws that he's talking about that say you could be a jerk? What does that mean, to be a jerk? And what does it mean when it says that they didn't want to be evil? And so there are these social pressures to keep you from being evil. What are those? What are you talking about? Because I think it's just an attempt to whitewash this stuff. And I don't like it, obviously.
Right. No, I think that he's totally trying to whitewash it and trying to make it seem like, oh yeah, there's a possibility that people could be jerks, which I agree with you. He's definitely using very vague language here in order to describe it. And he's not being very specific about what he means, because like what's evil to us now is obviously not necessarily going to directly map to what people would consider evil in Israel in before the Common Era, or in first century Israel. Like I find that it's rather weird to be this anachronistic about these terms, because he's obviously speaking in ways that we would understand now. Like, oh, what does it mean to be a jerk? Well, as a master of a slave, I feel like you're automatically a fucking jerk,
Yeah, that's a good point.
like and so I mean that's obviously going to vary between people and different people. Like, what does it mean for jerk? Which I find it really weird that there are Christians and Christian apologists out there that don't find it to be a jerk thing for somebody to own a slave, and it seems really weird to me.
Yeah.
This Jubilee year.
Yeah.
So
I mean, to recap on the biblical thing. So Moses prohibits slavery for Israelites and even limits it for foreigners that the Israelites might buy. No more than 7 years unless they really like being part of your household.
Nonsense.
So that's the Old Testament.
Yeah, it's nonsense.
It's all right. And now he's going to go into the New Testament. I probably got about 15 minutes before I got, because I still have to run. I have to run something back out to the hospital for Megan. But we could do the super chats if you. Sorry, I didn't mean to abruptly cut that. I was just looking at the clock and thinking I don't want to have to scoot out of here and leave people hanging.
No, that's fine. We can actually probably just go right on ahead, because he's just basically recapping his entire horrible position there.
Not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I feel like him recapping it is just him encapsulating all of his bad positions on this topic. Because, I mean, I feel what I feel like it's telling me, whenever I view these things, is that, like, well, I get it, John, that you read in the Bible, even if you go back to like an interlinear Bible where it translates the Hebrew for you so that you don't have to necessarily know Hebrew, which I think is awesome that you can just fucking flat out read Hebrew there, Josh. But using an interlinear text or whatnot, it's like I get that you're reading these things on the page. It's there, but the words don't mean what you think they mean. They actually mean something totally different. So I get this. I guess I get this feeling that these apologists are being like, I know what it says, but that's not what it says.
Yeah,
And it's like, I've said this before. It's like, excuse my fucking literacy on this, but I can read the words on the fucking page.
Oh my God.
But anyways, before we get to the super chats, thank you so much, Dr. Josh, for taking the time out tonight to discuss this with me. Because, like I said, I was writing up a script for me to do, but this is so much better having you right here. So I really appreciate that.
Of course.
And anybody wondering, I will have Dr. Josh's books and everything linked in the description right after this live stream. So if you want to go and check out his books, I highly suggest it, especially the new edition of the does the Bible condone slavery? I can't remember if that's the exact title. I think it's something around that. But sorry. But I'll have that link down below, and people need to read all 800 pages. I believe the audiobook's actually recorded by Seth, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So awesome. So we got I'm sorry Wilson, who says, can Dr. Josh say, so ladies, if the butt is round and you want a triple X throw down, dial 1-900 Mix-a-Lot, baby got back as Kent.
On call. So, gee, I'm going to preface this for a second because you're probably going to be one of these guys. It's like a pervert. I mean, I'm thinking about that 14-foot whale penis. And I say, okay, I'm here to help, though. So, ladies, if the butt is round and you want a triple X throw down, dial 1-900 Mix-a-Lot, baby, I got back. Okay, I'm here to help.
Casey said that's actually disturbing. But I have to say, that's the best $5 anybody has spent on this channel, I feel.
Oh, my God.
Next one is Nitty, who says, like agrarian societies had no idea how to fend for themselves. What the actual fuck?
Yeah, I mean, these, yeah. I mean, come on, Nitty. Look, nobody's arguing that it was like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or something, right? It wasn't like every day is, I lost my analogy there with Mr. Rogers, but yes, of course, life was hard. But this idea that life was impossible unless you were a slave, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know that's not exactly what he was saying, but like that's where it was leaning. That's a good point.
I mean,
Nitty.
I feel like that. I mean, I feel like that communicates what he was trying to communicate. Like, these people, it's like you could either be a slave or you could work really hard for your life and die. And it's like, I feel like that's somebody waking up and it's like, oh, I could work, but I have to wake up before noon. and it's like he's saying like, oh, that's really hard.
God.
Oh, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood is what you were looking for with the Mr. Rogers thing.
Thank you.
Is what Casey said.
Nice.
Next up is the governor, who says Gov needed his dose of Dr. Josh smacking an apologist.
Nice.
Which, I mean, Dr. Bergsma is a scholar, but that's also kind of compounds on why this is so disappointing.
Yeah. I mean, like this, I just, the nicest way that I can think to say this is it's motivated reasoning, right?
Mhm.
It's coming at a problem in the text with theological commitments and reasoning based on those theological commitments, and that is apologetics. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's really sad to see it when scholars engage in apologetics so blatantly. It's really sad to see that because I honestly thought that most of the OT scholarship and scholars were past a lot of that because in the past it has been a problem on occasion, but I hate to see people treat the scriptures this way. All right, and final super chat for tonight. We got Supreme Scientist who says, "Were Adam and Eve the first slaves?"
That is actually an amazing question. So I'll go back to Bruce Wells, who is actually working on, I think he's working on a monograph talking about the Garden of Eden and its relation to a particular type of Akkadian orchard tender who would have been like, at least semi-slave status, right? He's somebody tending the garden. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think there's a good argument to be made for it, right? That's what they're doing is working in the temple garden complex
Mhm.
for the deity. That's a good question.
Yeah, and I mean, if you go from a New Testament sort of viewpoint, it directly says in the New Testament, I can't think of where, but I know that it directly says that we were all slaves to Christ,
Hmm.
right? And it definitely puts us in that sort of slave category. I believe it was Paul that, slaves obey your masters as you would obey Christ or something like that.
It's also in
So
Hezekiah 3:14, I think. So
Oh, okay. That doesn't surprise me that they copied that from the Old Testament.
I'm just fucking around. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I have problems. That's what we've just proven.
No, no, you're fine. All right. Well, so that's going to be it for Dr. Bergsma. The rest of the interview, like Josh said, covers New Testament stuff. So we're not going to go into that right now. But, Josh, do you want to reiterate like where people can find you, what stuff you're doing right now, and all that kind of stuff? Just chill yourself.
Yeah, on that, I would encourage. I know the book right now is a little expensive, but there'll be a paperback version I think coming out in the near future. But if you can't afford it, I've read it cover to cover. It really is an excellent edited volume. Bill Deaver has an article in there. Kenneth Atkinson, Robert Rosetko, Mark Elliott, like a lot of there's a lot of amazing scholars contributed to it. And then also I have a chapter in there, but yeah. So I'm responding in that link on that. But if you do nothing else, check out the Bible and interpretation, that website that has all these popular scholarly articles, because there's my rejoinder to Paul Copan on violence and his critique of my chapter in this book, and then soon, maybe next week, I can't remember, I have an article or a contribution or whatever on slavery and answering apologetics on there as well. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other stuff on there that's again written by very, very good, reputable scholars. So it's a really great website. And of course, if you're not following Megan on the Bart Ehrman podcast, I know she's doing like a Q&A, I think a live show stream or something tomorrow. But I mean, like she's just awesome to follow. So definitely check her out.
I agree. Everything Megan is awesome to follow. I have put did the Old Testament endorse slavery and the misusing scriptures in the description, so
Thank you.
yeah, everybody should be able to get to that now. And I will say, Josh, that as far as the misusing scriptures, I've spent more on books.
Hmm. That's true.
So I have a book over here that was what, a couple $100 there, hon? Yeah, it was a couple $100. It was marketed to, universities and stuff. So
There
but
is
that's
there
how
is a
dedicated I am.
there is a German commentary on 1 Samuel, I think 13 to 24. I can't remember, 13 to 26. It's not the whole book of 1 Samuel. It's just those chapters. It's $367.
Christ.
And I'm trying to figure out how to save up the money to get it because it's apparently the most thorough work on that section of 1 Samuel out there. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, keep writing and selling books. Just
Hey,
churn
man.
them out there, Josh. I mean, come on.
Another year or so I'll be able to afford it, No.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Dr. Josh, for joining in
Thank you.
tonight and responding to this with me. I had no idea that you were going to be so passionate about this particular one,
Me
but
either.
I'm glad that I was able to capture some passionate Dr. Josh on the show tonight. But if everybody will follow the links in the description to Dr. Josh, and I actually forgot to put Digital Hammurabi in there so that people can find y'all. But I'm going to add that right now. But anyways, everybody follow Digital Hammurabi here on YouTube and buy Josh's books and all that kind of good shit. And I guess we will see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.